While some residents fear college students moving into these rentals, other residents like Tim Limecooler are more afraid that these new developments will not fit the character of the neighborhood.
So there was another area not far away, or really just kind of down the street from this vacant lot, where somebody had bought some property and built what they call skinny houses, and real narrow, tall, and long, kind of like apartments or condos or whatnot, and they just don't fit. It looks very odd, looks very weird. And if the neighborhood became a hodgepodge of old homes that were built in the 1910s and 20s and 30s and mixed among these modern low cost production places, it's just really going to it'll just hurt the neighborhood. It'll hurt the neighborhood's pride in a way. Not the students, just the structures. The structures are really the enemy. It's not the students. Students have been there forever.
Madison Russell, a student at Missouri State University who lives in rental housing in Phelps, says that she understands why some folks are upset, but it should be no surprise that college students gravitate towards the area.
Students don't take the best care of their homes. I know, I know there's some fraternities that maybe have like parties, things like that. So yeah, the outside of their homes would not be in the best suitable quality, but homeowners here who live only a block away from Missouri State have to know that since they live so close, this area is going to be prime location for college students, and so they're going to be wanting to live here. So it's hard to say. I mean, me being a student housing person here, I like where I live, I like where it's close, and I know it's going to benefit a lot of students who would want to live close to campus, so this would be a good area. So I kind of have to side with the college students mostly, because I know college housing is hard to come by, at least good, cheap, but also quality housing.
The thought of college students moving into these odd structure homes are just part of what people fear in the area. Alana Owens says there are other factors that contribute to the growing concerns over these new developments.
Well, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. Of course, when you have rentals and you have particularly college students, you have issues with noise, a lot of times with trash, with parking, parties and things like that. So, of course, all of those things are kind of effects of rental population sometimes. But so it's that, but then also I think they fear that it does bring property values down because you have declining. That kind of breeds more rental. People that see that maybe don't want to buy in the neighborhood, so then you have investors that buy more property and bring more rentals into the neighborhood, so it kind of feeds itself.
Randall Whitman, the principal planner of Springfield, says it's hard for long-term residents to embrace this kind of change in their neighborhood.
I think a lot of them see that as a proliferation of not just student housing, but of residents that don't have that long-term ownership in the neighborhood. They don't have ownership in the house because they're somewhat transient. They're transitioning from one place in their life to another, so they may be living there temporarily, and maybe fairly unfairly, but a lot of long-term residents who own property see transitional residents as somebody who doesn't have that same long-term goals for the neighborhood. They don't have that long-term ownership or social ownership in the neighborhood. So
John Sellers, the executive director of the History Museum on the Square, gives a brief history of how the Phelps Grove area came about.
The Phelps Grove neighborhood was developed just before World War I. It was owned by several local businessmen here in town, and they hired a man. Excuse me. It was owned by several local businessmen here in Springfield, and they hired a man named W.W. Johnson, who had promoted other real estate ventures in Taney County. And he came on board and began to develop the area around Phelps Grove. At that time, it had free running water, had the beginnings of a lake, and he developed a park-like setting in the middle and then residential areas around it. He built the first house on South Clay Street for he and his family, and then began to sell off the lots in the area there. Now, just to the east of that development was another area that had been developed just before that, around 1906 to 1909. And that area was platted with an interesting structure. It was platted with 25-foot wide lots, and something unheard of. Everything in Phelps Grove itself, Phelps Grove proper, had at least 40-foot lots, some of them 50. And so these 25-foot lots, what they would do, it was a way to give the people that bought them more flexibility as far as the size of house they built. So if they only needed 2 lots, they bought 2 25-foot lots, or they bought 3 or whatever, depending on how they wanted to develop their land. And so every house in that area is on at least 2 lots. And just nothing, nobody paid any notice of it. That's over 100 years ago. Nobody thought anything about it. But that area is now what is called the Phelps Grove neighborhood. It's been absorbed into a bigger complex of area, and so that those 25-foot lots are the crux of their current discussions and trying to develop that. We had a developer come in and want to start building some 17-foot wide houses, very long and narrow, and the neighbors really had concerns about that, and I think that's what's got the problems right now.
These 2 images are historic photos of the Phelps Grove neighborhood in the 1920s. Both images gives us a glimpse of what the neighborhood was like in the early 1900s.